Josh Warrington says that if he can't beat Mauricio Lara in a rematch, he may actually retire. Now, fighters often say stuff like this, but they don't really mean it a lot of the time. It's just a way of getting themselves up for a fight, by making themselves believe that everything is all on the line. It's do or die, that kind of thing. It's a way of motivating themselves. That's the word I was looking for. Perhaps that's what Josh Warrington is doing here by saying he'll retire if he can't beat Lara. But then again, maybe he genuinely means it. I personally think it's a hasty thing to say and a hasty decision to make. So I'm going to quote him here briefly. He said, "There is no point hanging about. If I can't beat this guy, I'm not mixing it with Gary Russell. No one is going to believe I'm going to mix it with him or Emmanuel Navarrete." Now, to me, that's a very short-sighted statement, because in boxing, styles make fights. It's chess, it ain't checkers. It's rock, paper, scissors. Just because you may not be able to beat Lara, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't beat guys at world level who are established champions. Now, I'm not saying I would pick him over Russell or Navarrete, but they won't necessarily destroy him the way Lara did. It really is about styles. Sometimes you come up against the guy that just has your number. He's got a particular style that you just can't deal with. Case in point, Hasim Rahman knocked out Lennox Lewis. He also got a draw with David Tua in the rematch, but really, Hasim Rahman won that fight. That was a poor decision. But Hasim Rahman's nemesis was a guy called Oleg Maskayev. He fought Maskayev twice, and Maskayev knocked him out both times late. And I remember reading an interview with Hasim Rahman where he said, "I don't know what it is about Maskayev. He's not the strongest guy I've fought. He's not the most skillful guy I've fought. He's not the biggest puncher I've fought. But he just has a knack of beating me. I don't know what it is about him." Another person Hasim Rahman beat was Corey Sanders, right? I would say Corey Sanders was a better fighter than Maskayev. Rahman stopped Corey Sanders, but Maskayev just had something about him. And I remember Rahman saying in that interview that if they fought 10 times, Maskayev would probably beat him 10 times. Some guys just have your number. So with Josh Warrington, he needs to take that into account. Some guys just got your number. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't beat other guys who are ranked higher. That's how boxing works. In fact, he's already beaten guys ranked higher. But some would say, well, maybe he feels like he's not the same fighter he used to be and all this kind of business. Now, interestingly, Josh Warrington spoke to Eddie Hearn, and he asked Hearn to put him in touch with Anthony Joshua because he wanted to ask AJ how he got over his defeat to Andy Ruiz. And it's very revealing what Josh Warrington says. He said that, and I'm going to quote here what he's saying about AJ. He said, "He was telling me a story when he was in New York. After the fight, him and his entourage went for a walk. And this guy goes, 'Hey, Anthony, why did you get beat up by that fat Mexican?' And his head went down. He went back to the apartment and stayed there for a few days. He said he cried, he ate ice cream, he sulked. But once he came back, he was ready to get back on the horse. I wanted to have my sulking time, but it has not happened yet." All right, so that's the quote from Warrington. Interesting insight into the psychology of Anthony Joshua, because AJ is not a very emotional guy. In the ring after the fight, a lot of people were criticizing AJ for not looking bothered by the fact that he just lost to Andy Ruiz. But again, he's not an overly emotional person. He does have some emotion, clearly, because when he went back to the hotel, when he was by himself and he was in his bed, probably thinking back to what had just happened, that's when some emotion hit him, because he was humiliated that night. It wasn't just a defeat. It's not like he lost a close decision. No, he got battered all around the ring. He got dropped 4 times in front of millions of people watching worldwide. When he was supposed to be setting up this Deontay Wilder fight, he gets absolutely obliterated by Andy Ruiz. The amount of trolls, the millions of people trolling him on the internet, calling him all kind of names, You're a fraud. You're a hype job. You've got no chin. You couldn't even beat a fat Mexican. You're rubbish. Wilder would have wiped you out. How dare you even claim you could have stepped in there against Wilder? All this kind of stuff. You see, if AJ had got dropped like that in sparring, let's say he was sparring Andy Ruiz, they probably would have stopped it after the second knockdown anyway. Maybe even the first knockdown. But because there wasn't, in sparring, there isn't millions of people watching, it wouldn't have hit him as hard psychologically. It still would have bothered him, don't get it twisted, but it wouldn't have hit him as hard because the eyes of the world are not on him. But when you get humiliated publicly like that, I'm telling you people, you get all these internet trolls and what have you who act like in that situation they would have been totally fine. Give me a break. There's a reason why we're here talking about world championship professional boxing and not doing it ourselves. Okay. Yeah, I've boxed, but ultimately I didn't have the mental fortitude required to get any higher than I got because I was working full time when I was boxing as an amateur, sometimes 12-hour days, and I'll go to the gym and I'd have no energy. There'll be nothing there. I was lethargic in training, lethargic in sparring. I couldn't do it. But then I would have some days off where I would have my annual leave and I'd be a different fighter in the gym. I'd be beating people up in sparring and looking $1 million and all the trainers were very happy. Now, I'm not making excuses. What I'm saying is there are some fighters who have day jobs, just like I had to deal with day jobs, and they still get in the gym and they perform. They're wired in such a way psychologically where the tiredness and the lack of sleep and all that kind of stuff, the long days work, they can still overcome that and still perform to the required level in the gym, in sparring, in fights. I couldn't at the end of the day. Now, look, some fighters do have the red carpet rolled out and they never have to work a day job. And maybe if they did, they wouldn't be able to achieve what they've achieved. But you do get some fighters. Dylan White, he was working a day job early on in his pro career. Oh yeah, I know that for a fact. Dylan White was working. He was working as a bouncer. So, and there are many other fighters who work long days in full-time jobs and they still manage to rise above that and become successful. And then they can go on and leave the job and be full-time professional boxers. So yeah, there's a reason why we sit here talking about the likes of AJ and so on, and why we're not doing it ourselves. So I'm always very quick to point out how mentally strong the guys at the top are compared to the average person. We can't even imagine the type of pressure that AJ has felt in his career. We can't even imagine it. So let's not sit here and pretend like, oh, he should be able to get over it easy. What's wrong with you? He's a human being. It doesn't surprise me that he went back to his hotel room and cried. Again, it's like he got his manhood taken from him. Unbelievably humiliating what happened to him that night. So it's understandable that Josh Warrington would want to reach out to AJ and get some advice. And there was an interview that Eddie Hearn did where he said AJ is kind of a little surprised that people are coming to him for advice because AJ still feels like he's a student himself. Whereas other fighters kind of look up to AJ, particularly matchroom fighters, because he's been there, seen it and done it. And he's kind of developing into a veteran now. Just think of all the fights he's been in and all the situations he's had to contend with. So it's interesting, I guess, from AJ's perspective, how people's perception of him is changing and how people's perception of him might be different from the perception he has of himself. And it probably made AJ feel good to have another guy, a world level fighter, reach out to him and say, hey, can you give me some advice? Probably made him feel like, wow, okay, I guess my comeback and redemption against Ruiz in the rematch has really inspired people. So that was interesting. But one thing I will say with regards to Josh Warrington reaching out to AJ, and it's after the conversation with AJ that he seems to have decided that he needs this immediate rematch with Lara. Warrington Lara is very different to AJ Ruiz. First of all, AJ actually dropped Ruiz in the first fight, and he was outboxing him for the first couple rounds. That was a situation where AJ rushed in to finish off an opponent, got caught with a big shot and dropped, and just never recovered. And Ruiz didn't let him recover, truth be told. He stayed on top of him. With Josh Warrington against Lara, truth be told, people, he was never really in the fight. He came back a little bit in the mid rounds, but I always got the impression that Lara was the ring general in there. Lara had him hurt in the first round, dropped and badly hurt in the fourth round. Yeah, came back a little bit in the middle of the fight, but then knocked him out badly in the end. So that was not like AJ Ruiz, because where was Warrington's success? He never hurt Lara. AJ hurt Ruiz. On top of that, AJ had a significant height and reach advantage over Ruiz, and he was always the better long-range boxer. Despite what these jokers were saying in the lead up to the rematch, I always said in all my videos, AJ has the boxing skills, the height and reach, the dimensions to outbox Ruiz. He does. The only question for me was, did he have the stamina to be able to keep it up for 12 rounds? And how would he hold up psychologically? That was my only question going into the rematch. But in terms of the dimensions and the boxing skills, he always had those to beat Ruiz. Anybody with eyes to see and an understanding of boxing would have known that and would have been saying that AJ has the size, the dimensions, and the skills to beat Ruiz on the outside. But with Josh Warrington, he's not the taller guy over Mauricio Lara. Isn't Lara taller than him? If not, they're the same height. So it's not like he can stay on the outside against a slow-footed guy who's much shorter than him, a la AJ against Ruiz. No, doesn't have that option. This guy's at least just as tall as he is, with just as longer arms. And Josh Warrington doesn't have power relative to his opponent the way AJ has relative to Ruiz. AJ really is the bigger puncher than Ruiz. So it's a different dynamic, AJ rematching Ruiz, than it is with Warrington rematching Lara. I personally don't like that rematch for Warrington. With AJ rematching Ruiz, it was a world title fight. Now, I didn't like that rematch either, and for different reasons. Not because I didn't think AJ could win that fight. I just felt like he never really had enough learning fights before he became champion. And what I saw for him is rebuilding himself the way Lennox Lewis rebuilt after the Oliver McCall defeat, where Lewis had a bunch of, non-title fights and stuff like that. He did try and run it back with McCall immediately, but they couldn't get that done. There was no rematch clause. But I think it worked out better for Lewis, because if you saw him against Lionel Butler, Justin Fortune, even Tommy Morrison, he wasn't back to his old self psychologically. He didn't have his old confidence back. So I think it was good that he had these rehabilitation fights before he eventually rematched McCall. And even when he rematched McCall, he still didn't have the confidence of the first fight, you see? So in retrospect, it worked out well for Lewis because he was able to build himself back up psychologically over a long period. AJ going into the rematch with Ruiz, okay, he beats Ruiz in a rematch. He doesn't have time to rebuild against specifically picked opponents. No, he's right back in at the deep end. And that was the main reason all along where I didn't like the rematch for AJ. I said, well, even if he beats Ruiz, he's still going to have issues to iron out. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to iron those issues out because he's going to be under constant pressure. He's going to be fighting top level fighters. So maybe I'll be proved to be wrong about that. But I'm just explaining the reason that I didn't like the rematch for AJ. Of course, the reason a lot of people did want AJ to rematch Ruiz is because he can get his title straight back. But with Josh Warrington against Lara, there's no titles. So you're rematching a guy, you want to rematch a guy, and there's really nothing to gain other than your pride back. There's no like world title or anything there. I'm sure in retrospect, he must be kicking himself thinking he should have fought Kid Galahad again. Because, the way it turned out in that Lara fight, terrible for him. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Josh Warrington saying he will retire if he can't beat Mauricio Lara in a rematch. Do you agree with this? Do you think he should? Or do you, like me, think he's being a bit hasty? And yeah, his pride is hurt, but he has to be a bit more pragmatic than that, in my opinion. Maybe he just feels like he's coming to the end of his career anyway. And if that's the case, then I guess it's the right thing to do if he loses again. But at the same time, if he feels like he's coming to the end anyway, why not try and go for one of the champions? He might be able to get a voluntary shot now because they're going to think he's very vulnerable. So why not do that? Why not go in as the underdog and people think, he just got wiped out by some unknown Mexican. This should be an easy defense. You can catch people by surprise that way. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.